Welcome back to another youth-centered podcast. Really excited to have today's guest. I hope you did able to check out Pat McGravy, North Andover Middle School educator, talking about his civics program in year 2. We posted that last week, and this one here, we're going to get up. Obviously, I wanted to do this right before Christmas, a great Christmas story in a lot of ways of a journey that a young man has gone on to. So my guest today is North Andover's own Andy Robie. So Andy, first of all, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Andy, I'd like you to give your bio a little bit. You know, there will be listeners on our podcast that obviously know you, but there will be a lot of people that don't. So let me ask you, who is Andy Robie?
I am a North Andover resident since 4th grade. Since I was 9, I moved here, and I got into the youth center program pretty early. Started coming to the camps, the summer fun camps, and graduated North Andover High School. I was a track captain, was a member of the music department. Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, and Andy, we've always loved having you here. You're looked at the last number of years as being someone that we consider one of our best counselors at Summer Fun. You actually work with the littlest kids, the kindergarten, first and second graders. And you, if you've ever seen Andy Robie, he's a tall guy, and seeing him with the little kids was always amazing. But when I would talk to your superiors, Nicole and Sabrina, they would always rave about how you came to work every day with just such a great attitude, and all the little kids obviously loved you. So this year, in the craziest year of the pandemic, we basically pulled off something that not many other people could do, and you were a major part of that. But sometime during the summer, I hear this story of what you're going to do at the end of the summer. So first of all, let me back up. When the pandemic hits, you're in college. I want you to talk a tad about that. What was the spring like when this year like no other year just came and happened?
Well, I did track at UMass for my freshman year, and I remember the last practice that we had all together. We were all in our indoor practice facility and having a really great time, but then it was like the next day we all went back home. And so at first, I was a little excited to go back home. I didn't think it was going to be like what it actually turned out to be. And so the first week back was fine, whatever. And then it just kept getting into this repetitive stuff, and I hated it. Mentally, it was really difficult. I think a lot of people can agree with that. But yeah, it was hard. I didn't have any enjoyment in doing school at that point. The switching to the online classes, I didn't really go to any of my classes. I wasn't an active member in my classes, any of that. So I didn't want to.
Now, why was that, Andy? Like, why were you not active? Was it just that at that point you really couldn't concentrate on the school stuff? Or you're not someone that obviously loves to be a remote learner? What was that all about?
Yeah, I think it was a mix of not wanting to do the remote learning, but also I lost interest in all of the classes that I was taking. So I was an engineer major freshman year, and by the end of the year, I hated that, and I didn't want to do any part of engineering. And so having to take those classes was just like a chore for me, and I just didn't want to do it. So I ended up not really doing it, which probably wasn't the best thing to do, but it's what happened. And I bet a lot of people can agree with that's something that happened to them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I talk to kids, as you know, every single day, and obviously I was concerned about our high school kids last year and stuff, but people didn't forget that we work closely still with a lot of our college kids, and I was blown away with, you know, how many kids were struggling, why they were struggling, how they were struggling, and so I don't think your story is unique in that fact. I think a lot of people struggle with that. So then we bring you on for another year of Summer Fun. Again, like I said earlier, a lot of people didn't think we were going to be able to pull it off, and we did. And I remember one day, Nicole Sharp came to me, and I was asking about Andy. And she goes, "Did you hear what he's going to do?" And I'm like, no. And obviously I didn't talk to you every single day. I saw you at work. But she's like, he's doing something really cool. He's not going to go back to school, and he's going to travel the country. And she mentioned, I think, that you were originally going to one of our other employees. You were actually driving him out to his school, which I think was in the, in the Illinois, Ohio area, somewhere in there, and then you're going to come home and then do this whole trip again. So first of all, tell me how this came about, that you wanted to do this and not go back to school as we know it. So where did that all first come from? And, take us through the first process of, I think I want to do this, and how did the family take it, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I feel like I had the idea that I didn't want to do online school. So that was a definite fact. I wanted to figure out something else to do. And one of my other friends, we had talked a little about doing a cross-country trip together at some point in our lives. And, we had talked a lot, and it ended up turning out that he couldn't do the trip. Oops, sorry about that. So I had kept pushing forward with the idea, and as the end of the summer rolled around, my dad had been really helping me out along with the planning and everything, and he was just like, you just got to do it or not. And so I ended up going for it and started planning out the actual route that I took and have it all mapped out and everything.
So I assume that took place while you were working for me in the summertime.
Definitely.
How much went into actually logistically planning how I'm going to do this?
Honestly, a lot less than you'd think. So in my journal here, I have the route that I was planning on taking, where I was going to sleep every night, all this stuff. But I didn't end up using half of the places that I found, just because I would plan them out the day I was driving, which I like doing it that way. But it wasn't like a long month process to plan out the route. Honestly, I think I probably planned the whole trip in less than a week.
Really?
Yeah.
So when you were talking to your family and your dad in particular, and I think I asked you this in a pre-meeting we had here, did you have any idea of what this whole thing was going to cost? Because I think you told me you had a budget that you were planning for, mm-hmm. and it's amazing to me how much you were able to stay in that budget, which we'll talk about later. But how did you factor that into the planning, a budget?
A close family friend of ours, the Lathrops, Julian Lathrop, did a trip similar to mine after he graduated high school, and so I wasn't able to go to their house and meet up with him, but my dad ended up, my mom and dad went over for drinks with their parents, I think. And Julian explained a lot of his trip to my dad and different things that he didn't think he would have needed, but ended up needing, and all sorts of different things. And he told me his budget, which was similar to the one that I was using. And he went for a full year and was able to stay in his, I think it was $3,500 budget. And so hearing that number, I was like, okay, I think I could realistically spend that same amount of money doing my trip as well, being alone.
And you were using your own car,
mm-hmm.
and I'm assuming before you even thought about taking part, you made sure the car was going to be able to make this trip,
mm-hmm.
correct?
Definitely.
And we'll talk a little bit later about how we did have a little problem with the car. But so pretty much as we wind down summer fun in the early August, I meet with you, as I met with everybody, to kind of debrief this crazy year we had. And I think you knew I was kind of really excited about hearing about your journey. So this is something that, and I've told you before, I think as a person of my age, I almost am jealous that I never probably had the courage at your age to do what you did. And we'll talk obviously about the journey. But I was very excited, and we made a deal that day, that I wanted you to come back and talk to us. And I think you and I have talked about a few plans that we want to do to kind of actually turn this into a little bit of an educational thing. You've did a blog, you've got beautiful pictures, and I think this is an educational thing we can do with probably collaborating with the high school and the library to basically showcase what your journey was all about. So when I said goodbye to you in August, and I told you to keep in touch, and you did, which was great. You'd send me some stuff, which was awesome. So the day comes that you're about to be ready on this trip. What was your feelings, and what was your, let's be honest, what was your parents' feeling? It's a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Their son has decided to do this journey, again, obviously in a global pandemic. Were there concerns by you or your mom or your dad that this was a great idea, Andy, but is it the best time to go?
Yeah, definitely. My mom was in that general area of thinking. She was definitely on board, but she had more concerns than my dad did, for sure. COVID-wise, they weren't as nervous, I think, as just me leaving. My mom was really making sure that I had like a place to sleep every night, like that, those sort of things, like moms do. But yeah, I was more just nervous to like get out there because the first stop I made was at my brother's frat house in Syracuse. So I wasn't really nervous to leave the first day because I knew where I was going and everything. But like the fourth or fifth days, once I really got out into the middle of nowhere, I started getting a little more nervous for sure. But I was more excited to get out there, I think, from the start. So there weren't too many nerves going into it.
Good. And as your parents said goodbye to you, you were off onto this adventure. Little Jack Londonish that you were really going out and exploring different things. So first stop, I suppose the first day you drove directly to Syracuse, if I'm correct, right? And you meet up with your brother and probably his friends or whatever. And then how long did you stay in Syracuse?
Just a night.
Just a night. So then you kind of say goodbye to your brother, and now it's unfamiliar territory, right? Your direction is now...
Definitely.
Your direction, and depending on everything from weather and how many miles you travel a day. So take me where this started from Syracuse, New York.
So from Syracuse, I took a pit stop at Niagara Falls, hung out there for a little while. I ended up locking my keys in my car, like right when I got there, so I had to hang out there for a little bit longer for AAA to help me out. And then from Niagara Falls, I went to a little state park in Indiana. Because I was planning, there's a national park called Indiana Dunes, but all the campgrounds were booked there. So I found a different state park pretty close.
And what part of Indiana? I mean, I've been to Indiana. What part of Indiana is that?
Up by the Great Lakes.
Okay, so the northern part.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then from there, I decided to go to Chicago and get a slice of pizza.
Deep dish.
Yep. And it was good. I wouldn't say it was just like a life-changing meal, but it was very good, and I'm glad I got to experience that. And then from Chicago, I drove out to eastern South Dakota, and I think I slept in my car somewhere.
So you went from Chicago to eastern South Dakota. How long was that? I mean, was that a one?
I drove through the night.
Through the night, okay.
So it was like an 7-hour drive. And then from there, I went out to the Badlands in South Dakota and met up with one of my close friends, Jack Lopez. And he met up with me a few parts of the trip, actually, which was really awesome. And then from the Badlands, I made my way through another national park out to Grand Teton in Wyoming. And actually, on that way out to Grand Teton, there was a blizzard. So that was like a week into my trip. And most of the roads in Wyoming were completely shut down.
So what did you do?
Sat in my car in my sleeping bag and read a book.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. A lot of reading, which was surprising because I hated reading all my life.
Now, were you pulled over somewhere? Are you on a street,
in like
a park?
Stop.
Okay, you're in a truck stop. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then from Wyoming, or from Grand Teton, I drove up to Yellowstone, then to Glacier in Montana, which was really awesome to be up there. And then through Idaho, out to Olympic National Park in Washington, down the coast to Crater Lake in Oregon, the Redwoods in California. You want me to just keep going through the...
Yeah, why don't you take us through it? And I'm going to have a number of questions along the way, but take us through the whole course.
Yeah, so then from the Redwoods, I met up with my cousins in Cupertino outside of San Francisco. And then I also met up with Jake Seatack, another summer fun employee.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Because he's at UCal Berkeley, right? Okay.
Yep. So we went out to lunch together, which was really awesome. And then I went down to Yosemite, Kings Canyon, and Sequoia National Parks, which was really awesome. I loved those three. Then down into LA, San Diego, Joshua Tree National Park, and then into Arizona, where that was my longest stretch of the trip because of the car accident.
Yeah, hold on that story, because we're going to actually talk about that in a little bit.
And then from there, I went up to the Grand Canyon, Zion National Park, Bryce Canyon. I hit all the parks in Utah, actually, which was really awesome. And then into Colorado, into Boulder, where I stayed with Jack again, I went to Denver and I stayed with my cousins. And then from Denver, I drove out through Oklahoma into Kentucky. And this was like my route home. I went home in like 4 days, I think, from Colorado to North Andover.
Sure.
So I was just ready to get home. And so I had a few stops in Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky and then Shenandoah in Virginia. And then from there, I kind of booked it straight home.
Just worked it straight up north from there. So that's the skinny on literally your route and how you took it. Let's talk a little bit about, because I know there's probably some very eager kids that want to listen to this, and then there'll be some nervous parents listening to this also. Talk to me a little bit about, like, every day that you called it a day. Like, how did you plan where and how you were going to be sleeping someplace, and take us through the various places that you actually slept in. And we obviously heard you slept in a car during the blizzard, but what were types of places you went to?
Majority, it was campgrounds. So I slept in a lot of campgrounds, especially in the national parks. A lot of national forests have free camping anywhere, so you can do whatever. And so I slept there a bunch, and then a solid third of the nights I was in my car. Definitely. And then also
Now, why did you choose? Was that just made it the most sense to stay in your car?
That, and like it would be driving like an 8-hour day, and then I just find a rest stop or something and sleep there instead of having to find an actual campground or something like that.
Sure.
That would take a lot more time.
So in a lot of ways, that was easier than trying to research how far you are from the park. Okay.
And I wrote down a bunch of like free campgrounds in my book, but honestly, a lot of them were more suspicious than staying in my car.
Sure.
Like a rest stop.
Right.
So I felt better sleeping where other people were sleeping, and oftentimes there were other people sleeping in the rest stops. So.
Okay. When you say suspicious, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think my mom wanted me to stay safe, obviously, and so sleeping in rest stops were not her number one idea for me to be doing, but
sure.
It was just like a lot of these places that I have were like GPS coordinates that I'd be going to, which isn't a very secure location.
Right.
And I don't really know what's there and what's not. And so being able to just pull off the road and sleep there and then get back on the main road instead of having to go off like 20 minutes out of the way, it just made it was a lot more efficient for me to be staying there. And I felt very safe in those places. There was never really a time where I was scared for anything to happen to me. Good.
Now, the second thing that moms and pops and concerned people out there is, we now know that where you stayed overnight. How did you eat? Like, where did you eat? Did you have a budget for that? And I know we've talked about some great stories you had where you've met people where you've actually been able to share different foods with different people, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the whole food experience also.
Mm-hmm. So the majority of it was, I brought a little camp stove, and I was cooking oatmeal for breakfast, like peanut butter and jelly for lunch, and then pasta for dinner. Almost probably a solid half of the meals was that. And so that I was able to cook wherever I wanted. Oftentimes it was on the trunk of my car, on the roof of my car I'd be cooking. A few other times, like you said, there were people that would bring me in to have a meal with them, which was really awesome. One story in particular was in Glacier National Park when I met up with this Nepalese family who ended up bringing me to their motel room and cooked me an authentic Nepalese meal and let me shower and ended up letting me stay in their motel room as well that night, which was incredible.
Were you surprised that someone would do that, and were you nervous of doing that?
Yes and yes. I don't know if it's just me, but like growing up in Massachusetts, I don't think we have that. You don't find people that have the same hospitality, I think, than when you're in the woods hiking around. Like, it's a different type of person you find.
Sure.
And so I was very surprised to find a family that invited me to come over and eat with them and stuff like that. I forgot the second question.
Well, I mean, just, you just kind of answered both of you. Obviously, it is kind of a little weird, right?
Yeah,
in terms
definitely.
and then there's a trust issue.
Mm-hmm.
But you had told me the story. You had met this family kind of twice in a day and or a couple of days, and I think you felt more comfortable with them. And I think my first question for you that I had when I saw you when you got back was Nepalese food. What's it like?
It's really spicy. It's similar to Indian food. It was very, very spicy, but it was delicious. Chicken, rice, that type of food.
Sure.
With very, very good flavors.
Did you, obviously that was almost a luxury to a certain degree. And I know you had mentioned, I think that your mom and dad had budgeted an occasional time that you could go out to a real restaurant and get real food. Those other days where you were having the oatmeal, the PB&J, and the pasta, how old did that get for you? Were you good with that almost on a regular basis?
I kind of forced myself to be good with it, but it definitely got old very quickly.
I'm sure you're not having too much oatmeal, PB&J, and pasta right now, right?
None.
Okay.
I don't think I've touched any of that since I've been home.
So talk a little bit about the budget. So I think you blew me away with what it actually really cost, and minus the car problem out in Arizona, what did something like this cost you for that entire trip?
$3,500.
You were able to do it on $3,500
minus the car, yeah.
Right. Which is, why don't we get into that? So you were out in Arizona. Things are going well. And I always, as a parent and as someone that's done a lot of driving throughout the country, actually, I always get worried about is a car going to make it or whatever. So my first questions with you even before you left was, how's the car? If you had anything checked, blah, blah, blah. So sounds like the car was doing really well and until we headed out to the left coast there. So what happened in Arizona?
Yeah, so it was the day one of my best friends, Elliot Schoonmaker, was flying into Arizona to meet me on the trip. About 2 hours before his flight landed, I was going into Phoenix, I think, just to walk around, just see the city. And I'm merging off the highway, and the traffic off the highway was completely stopped. And I thought it was like slowly creeping, but it wasn't. And as I merged to the exit, I went to slow down, and I think I pressed my brakes too hard, and the wheels just locked up and skid. Sure. And then I rear-ended this woman. Yeah, that was a bad day. Definitely the worst day of the trip.
So you get out of your car. Obviously, you want to make sure the woman's all right, you're all right, or whatever. But the car had damage. So take me through that whole process.
Yeah, so the hood was like scrunched in. The core support beam was pressed against the radiator, but nothing was leaking from the car, which is great. So I was able to drive off the highway and get to where I need to go. This is actually a pretty crazy story. As I was getting off the highway, there was a homeless person standing begging for money, and his sign said something like he just needed a meal. And I had $4 left in my wallet, and so I gave him the $4 saying that he needed it more than I did. And we talked for a second, and the light turned green. And then 6 days later, when my car ended up getting fixed, I found a guy that was able to just do some under-the-table body work on it. And the original cost of the car was supposed to be $524. And then when I went to pay for it, the woman was like, "Oh, you can just give me $520." So it was like those $4 that I had given away came back and helped me out.
Interesting.
My mom really loves that story.
That's a great story.
That's a great
story. So obviously you spent a little more time there, but then the car was able to get up and running, and obviously you were able to make the way back. So about halfway through the trip, I get a text from you, and you share a link that I can check out your blog. Tell me a little bit about how the blog got started, why you did the blog, and I need you to start talking about I know you consider yourself an amateur photographer, but some of your pictures are totally outstanding. And I know we're not going to be able to really show this on a podcast, but I'm hoping in future times where we have you make a presentation to our community that we can show some of those things. So how did the whole blog, photography, talk to me about all that?
So going into it, I had no photography experience, but I wanted to bring a camera with me so I could take pictures, obviously. So I bought like a pretty beginner camera. It was less than $200, and the blog was started just because my family forced me to. They wanted something to see that I'm okay, still alive, and where I am. And so that was the main purpose of the blog. But it turned out to be like one of the most fun things to do. And taking pictures was the most fun thing that I was able to do on the trip. And yeah, I'd like to say that I took some pretty cool pictures too.
So it's interesting because you didn't tell me that side of the story. So your mom and your dad tell you they want you to do a blog, and I never looked at it that way. As a parent, I look at it now, I'm like, that's exactly what you do, because, the reality is you're not going to text me every day. You're not going to call me. Exactly. I got to know you're okay. And by following along a blog which sees that you're alive and you're having fun and you're smiling, that's a pretty cool reason to start the blog.
Yeah, exactly.
But I got to think this blog took on a whole different life as far as documenting your journey.
Yeah, definitely. Looking back on it now, being able to scroll through and see where I went and the pictures that I was able to take, it's really cool to have something, and I'm glad that my parents and grandparents forced me to keep up with the blog and stuff like that. So definitely, I've loved taking pictures ever since.
Yeah, and some of the pictures, people, is outstanding. He's brought a couple in today, but he's showing me some other ones, and we're going to get a couple of them up on when we promo this podcast, so you can see some of the stuff on that. How much did you, besides the blog, how much did you communicate with mom, dad, siblings, grandparents? Was there a deal that you check in once a week or anything like that? How much communication?
I had made a deal that I was going to check in at least once a week, but it ended up turning out I was calling my dad almost every day. Same with my mom. It was a little harder because she was working and my dad works from home, so it was easier to be calling my dad than my mom. But I definitely was talking to my whole family multiple times a week.
So in this day and age of technology, that's pretty cool, right? So you're halfway across or all the way across the country, and you still can get in contact. I think about when I was your age, I mean, I would have had to find a payphone somewhere, right? And that in itself would have been an experience. So in terms of the blog, you've put that together, and how often now that you've been back do you revisit the blog?
Not as much as I think I should. I've only checked it out a few times, honestly, but talking about it now, I think when I get home, I'm definitely going to
take a look at it.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about a little bit about the people, right? So you brought up something that I totally agree with. We live in the Northeast here, which I think things are real fast. I think at certain times, I don't think people are so preoccupied or whatever. Sometimes the niceness factor is not great. I've spent a lot of time in the Midwest. My guy George Niang went to school in Iowa State, so I spent 4 years out in Iowa. And to be honest with you, Iowan people are just so much different than Massachusetts people. Talk to me a little bit, region by region, about the different people you met and any kind of people that really stood out for you. I know you were lucky enough to have some of your friends meet you along the way. It was pretty cool that you had some family in certain parts of the country. You were able to connect with them. But how about some of the people you just met on an everyday basis?
Traveling through the Midwest, it's a completely different vibe than you get in New England. It's kind of weird how nice people are coming from New England. Like, this is the most bizarre story that I have from the trip, probably. When I was in Yellowstone National Park, I had been camping for, I think, 3 nights. And I was leaving to fill up my big 5-gallon water jug that I kept with me the whole trip. This man approached my car and just started talking to me and asked me about where I was from because he saw the Massachusetts license plate. And it ended up turning out that he had worked in Tewksbury off of Dascombe Road, so very close by. And he lived in New Hampshire for a while. And we talked for probably less than 10 minutes, and I ended up getting his phone number, and he invited me to come out to stay with him in Idaho after I leave Glacier. So like 2 stops from where I was. And that was just the most crazy thing ever because I ended up going out to Idaho and staying with him and his wife for 2 nights. And this spring, I'm probably going to go back out to Idaho and meet up with him again.
Yeah, I didn't know that's how that came about. We'll talk about that towards the end because I want to tell people about a new decision you've made on that whole thing. But obviously, small world, right? Tewksbury's right around the corner, and you meet this guy out there that is part of that. What about some of the other, types of people you met? Were people friendly along? Were they helpful? Even all the way down to when you had the car issue, did you feel like people rallied around this kid that was by himself trying to, do this journey by himself?
Yeah, I definitely say so. You meet a lot of people just hiking through the woods and stuff. You'll come across people and have small conversations, and everyone's so open to talk, which was weird to me. And specifically the car situation, I had been driving around Phoenix for like 2 or 3 hours trying to find an auto body shop that would fix my car for me. Then I found this one guy who was one of the nicest people I've ever met, and him and his wife, they gave us cookies as we left. And I think I have to send. I haven't sent him a picture of the car, but I have to send him a picture of the car that made it home now. But yeah, it was weird meeting these different people, and even people that had different views than I did, like political wise, whatever.
Yeah.
Even those people you're able to have a wonderful conversation with, and you don't get any malicious vibes.
That's great, because I think, you and I talked about this. I mean, the decisiveness in this country right now is just very disheartening to me. And you went to all parts of the country that have very different views, whether it be liberal views, conservative views, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, Democratic views, Republican views, et cetera, et cetera. And it's good to hear that in a lot of ways people could put apart their political, because I think that's what we should be doing,
Definitely.
right? I think deep down, I think people are good people, and we try to deal with that. So you've actually were able to kind of navigate that pretty good with that. Nothing is obviously always perfect. Talk to me a little bit about, were there some people that you met that made you a little nervous, or just even hardships of the trip? What was some, again, we heard the biggest hardship with the car happening, but if someone was thinking about doing this, what are some, maybe some things you were a little nervous about, either people or places?
Honestly, there were not very many times where I was that nervous. I think I got homesick a few times, but I that's completely normal.
Sure.
But there weren't, I'm trying to think of it right now. There weren't many people or places that I went that I felt unsafe or like something could happen, anything like that. So, and I was pretty lucky to have that happen, I think.
That's great. Yeah, that's definitely great. Any in terms of the logistics and just doing this whole thing in terms of a hardship? Because you're a kid that I've always known as, you kind of roll with things. I don't see a kid that panics at everything. You have a good head on your shoulders, and I think you kind of figure things out, where some people are, quite frankly, are impatient. I know just even that car incident would have probably panicked a number of people and freaked them out. Sounds like you just, it sucked, but you kind of rolled with it, right?
I was definitely freaking out a little bit, but yeah, I had to. There wasn't many other options at that point. I think the hardest thing for someone to do this would be like getting the right equipment. And so
Sure.
I had one of my close family friends, the Websters, they gave me a bucket load of camping equipment and stuff like that I used and really saved my life for
Sure.
a lot of different things. One thing that I should have packed more of was warm clothes.
Okay.
I got cold towards the end of the trip in Utah and Colorado, but
So preparation. So, one of the things when we take your story a little bit on the road here, we would talk about preparation, and obviously clothing is a big part of that. The way you did it, for the cost you did it, camping equipment is vital, right? You got to be able to cook your own food, sleeping bags, et cetera, et cetera. So being prepared, I think, obviously is a key on that whole thing. When you got back, and you've been back for a bit now, talk to me a little bit about yourself. So if I'm correct, you left an engineering major who was kind of questioning, whether I want to stay in engineering. What have you learned about yourself right now? Who is Andy Robie post-trip as opposed to pre-trip?
I don't know. I'm very against school right now. I've been having conversations with my parents a lot about this. I know what I want to study, but I don't want to study it now, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Because I want to go towards an environmentalism, that type of career path. And I don't want to do it online, but I think I'm going to have to do a little of it. But I've definitely changed to become more of I'm very outdoorsy now. I wasn't as before, but now, like I told you earlier, I've been rock climbing a lot. hiking, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, there haven't been too many changes, but definitely a few.
So one of the things we did talk about is you are becoming more of an outdoorsy person, and in a lot of ways, this is an obvious thing that comes from a trip like that. You were camping most of that time, so and I think the Northeast is a wonderful place for being outdoors. Rock climbing everywhere, indoor, outdoor rock climbing. Our presidential range and everything with hiking and the stuff. This is a beautiful part of the country on that. So we're in a crazy time, and you're not the only one that's questioning the existence right now of schooling this way. Do you see yourself, I think I heard this, correct me if I'm wrong, that you know what you want to study, and it might be something in the environmental field, but you don't see yourself doing it back at age 20, but maybe when I'm 23, 24. Is that kind of what you're looking at?
Yeah, I definitely want to. I have so many mixed feelings because I want to get my degree just so I can be done with it, but I don't want to do it, kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, that's definitely inaccurate.
And now that you're home, okay, and I'm sure your mom and dad are just ecstatic that you are back home and you're safe and blah blah blah. But what do you think they see of their new son? And I don't want to say new son, but obviously things have changed, and this trip has been a great experience for you and has probably opened your mind to what I may want to do, what I may not want to do, things like that. How's your mom? They seem to be extremely supportive of you just by even doing this trip. Mm-hmm. How are they now with the Andy that's not 100% sure what he wants to do?
They're still definitely supportive. I think, yeah, we have similar thoughts. Like, they both agree that it would be smart to continue my education, but they also are aware that I don't, like, my heart's not in that right now.
Right.
So it's a hard thing to balance, figuring out what I should do versus what I want to do, and all those different ideas going around right now.
How is Andy different in December of 20 than he was maybe when he left in August?
I think I like to think that I grew a lot as a person being out by myself for a while. I think I'm more aware of issues, and I'm trying to think of like a right way to put this, but like world issues and how they affect people and how people should react and act towards those things. And I think I've grown as a person to be more like empathetic and understanding of different things. And I don't think you get a lot of that living in North Andover. Mm-hmm. It's hard to find those other experiences and how other people live. But being able to drive through all sorts of different places, you really see how other people are living versus how you are.
Sure. And
so I think I'm very gracious for what I have, because like driving through Portland, Oregon was very sad, because you drive through the highways and there are just tents and tents of homeless people, and a lot of it isn't like mental health issues, it's just economic homelessness.
Sure.
And so you see a lot of things like that, and it puts your life in perspective really well. And so I think that I've definitely grown a lot. I know this is after August, but from December to August, I think I've been going towards that change, and then going on the trip just really
reinforced that whole thing.
For sure.
So what would you say, and this is kind of a two-part question, what would you say to some young folks, male or female, that would consider a trip like you did? And what would you say to their parents that might be nervous of something like this?
I think as long as you set up some sort of, you have a solid plan and you're communicating with them, I think there shouldn't be any fears. I think especially a lot of trips like these, people go with a friend or something. And so something like that would be, I think, very doable, and less fears would be around that than going alone. But I think it was such a great experience for me to be alone and be on my own and figure things out for myself. And I think just kids in general need that ability to have that chance to really be on their own, whether it's at 19 or you go in 23 or something.
Sure.
But I think it's a really good experience, and you've talked about it, how sheltered this community is, and I think it's such a good way to get out and push through that boundary of being so sheltered.
Come out of that comfort zone and experience life. And again, I love North Andover. I do think that people and kids your age need to understand it's a little, there's more than North Andover.
Definitely.
I mean, heck, we only have to go 2 miles down the road to Lawrence to see a totally different economic situation. But what would you say to the parents of those kids?
Be supportive. I think with my parents' support, it made it so much easier to be comfortable doing what I was doing. My dad was constantly pushing me to do more things that I enjoy, and it's just so much nicer to have people in your corner when you're doing something like this, as opposed to like rebelling and going against someone. So I think having that support and someone to fall back on always, like if I was ever in trouble, I know I could always just drive home or talk to my parents, figure something out, talk to my family, anyone. And so I think having that group of people in your corner is really helpful, and I think that's the most important thing.
Absolutely. Sure. Absolutely. No, that's great. As you kind of came back here, we sat down and talked, and then you kind of didn't blow me away, because nothing surprises me with you in terms of some of the things, but you talked to me about that you might be heading back out again, and you started to talk a little bit about it. Talk about our friend out in Idaho and what that second trip's going to be for you and what that's all about.
Yeah, so my friend Rich out in Idaho, he has, I believe, 102 acres of land right on Lake Coeur d'Alene in the panhandle of Idaho. And so his plan, he's a retired, I think, chem engineer or he was an engineer, but he worked in sales, that type of thing. And he's been trying to live as sustainably as possible out in Idaho. And so he offered me a job to come out and work his land and help put up A-frame cabins and yurts for his campground, different things like that, put solar panels on his house. And so it's just an opportunity for me to do something in the field that is very sustainable and environmentally friendly, and definitely something that I could see myself doing when I'm older. And with all the confusion with what's happening with school and everything, it definitely seems like the number one option for me right now. So
when do you plan on heading out there?
It'd be around mid-March.
Okay. And your take is to probably stay out there through the summer?
If they'll go as well as in my head they're going to go, that's my plan, yeah.
Okay. Awesome. All right, couple more questions before we wrap up. Obviously, we could talk for hours on this. We talked a little bit about the new traveler in you, and that traveling is something you're interested in doing. And as I look at logistically how you did this trip, which I would call more of a northern route, and then you did come back a tad on the southern route, but there's still other parts of the country that what's the future traveling, either domestically or on foreign soil? What would be some of the destination points this travel would like to do over the next decades?
My top 3 are Alaska, because there are like 6 national parks in Alaska that I'd love to go to, and then New Zealand is on my list, and probably Norway is the 3rd. But nice. New Zealand would be really cool because it's the Lord of the Rings, so you're hiking through that, and their economy is very hiking based, and they have these little camps set up that you pay less than $10 a night, and they'll have a bed for you, so you don't have to be lugging like 50 pounds on your back going on these long hiking journeys. You just can carry your food, and you'll have a place to stay every night. And so that, I think, would be like one of the coolest trips ever. Yeah.
And that would be a really cool trip. I'm a big fan of Norway. Why Norway for you?
I've seen the pictures of the coastline.
Beautiful.
And I've never seen anything like that.
Stunning, actually. Yeah. Awesome. And then obviously I told you my story of my elderly mother many years ago with her trip to Alaska, and it was probably the highlight of her life. And and she wasn't obviously camping like you would be, but the experience of Alaska, the pictures I saw, her documentation of everything was real impressive. So that's an awesome 3 trips, and hopefully in the future for you, and hopefully you'll get to do that. Let me finish with asking you, I'm a people-oriented person, and I believe that we're all on journeys, and you're a young guy, and I'm obviously much older than you, but I believe in my journey, people have come along that have helped me, and some of it's profound help, some of it's just giving $4 to a homeless person. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit of what you've learned about the people that you really connected with. And I'm going to put it on you. Are you going to keep in touch with them? I mean, these were people that, to a certain degree, in a very small way, I know you're not going to be able to probably find that homeless person when you pulled off the highway, but obviously the Idaho guy we talked about, the person that fixed your car and get it back. I mean, I actually think that person would love to hear from you that his work and his compassion and obviously giving you some cookies with his wife and everything else was one of the reasons why you made it back safely. So talk to me a little about the people you met and how that's affected you, and are you going to keep in contact with any of the ones that you can?
Definitely. Rich, me and him talk on a week-to-week basis. We had a phone call, I think, 2 nights ago, and so me and him are definitely going to keep in touch. Like I said earlier, I have to send Jim over at MPG Auto in Phoenix, Arizona, a postcard or something like that. But then I think people in general, I was really able to find out that, like, if you treat people well, they'll treat you well.
Sure.
And so if you go into any situation with a smile, and I was trying to smile the entire trip, and it makes you happier. And so just trying to be as friendly as you possibly can, I think really, really is beneficial to anyone, because you'll find people that you didn't think would be as friendly to you. So.
Absolutely. No, it's pretty powerful with that. Andy, I've said this to you before. I see a little bit of my son in you. He was a talented athlete, but he told me one year in high school he didn't want to be defined as an athlete. He wanted to do things and be empathetic and caring, and he's taken on a career as an addiction therapist and working with the homeless, and it's really his passion. And when I saw early young, I mean, you're a tall kid. I know people had you pegged just as is he a basketball player, is a track player? And I saw the saxophonist. I didn't actually see the athlete. I saw some parts about you that I was like, God, I like this kid because he's not afraid to try different things or whatever. And then obviously I've been blown away. You've been a great worker for us here at the Youth Center, and what you bring to the table in terms of the person you are. And then this amazing trip. Like, I am jealous. I told you that in August, and I told you that the other day when we met. I wish I probably had the courage that you had to actually do this, because I think this was a trip of a lifetime for you. And I'm hoping you have many more trips of a lifetime. But it is impressive. You're an impressive young man, and you know what we think of you here at the YC, and we wish you all the best of the luck. For the listeners, we are trying to I'll call it the Andy Robie Tour, but I do have some visions of Andy expanding this where he can actually show some of his photography work, where he can share his blog, maybe even talk to, we talked about Steve Nugent at the high school, and maybe, talking to kids that, maybe feeling like they need to maybe do some kind of an experience like this before they head to school, and kind of like a gap year type thing. Yeah. And I do believe Kathleen Keenan down at the library would love to have you as a monthly speaker to do this. Now, again, we're in a crazy time with the pandemic, and hopefully, by the springtime, we can actually have live audiences with things like that. But I also think we can do it virtually, too. So sky's the limit with that. You said you're on board with that. And, we have a little bit of a time limit because it looks like you're going to be heading out in March. So we've probably got to fast track this. But, again, Andy, this was wonderful. I really appreciate you coming on the You-Centered podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And as we finish every podcast, we always say too much passion is never enough passion.